The dust of the Arizona Territory swirled across the barren landscape like a dancer, wild and unpredictable. As Zara Holloway clutched her two children to her chest and watched her last hope disappear with the stagecoach that had left them behind. It was 1878, and the harsh realities of the frontier had never felt more crushing than they did at this moment. Standing alone outside a ramshackle trading post with nothing but 3 tattered carpetbags and the remnants of a broken promise. "Mama, I'm thirsty," whispered 6-year-old Emma, her copper curls damp with sweat against her forehead. 4-year-old Samuel said nothing, but his wide brown eyes spoke volumes as he clung to his mother's skirts. "I know, darling," Zara said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the desperation rising in her throat. "We'll find water soon." The truth was far more dire than she dared admit, even to herself. Her husband Thomas had died of typhoid 3 months prior in St. Louis, leaving behind mounting debts and creditors eager to claim what little they had left. The letter from her cousin in California had been a lifeline, promises of work in a growing town, a small room they could share, a chance to start over. But the last of their money had gone to the stagecoach tickets, and when the driver had demanded an additional fee at this remote stop, claiming a territorial tax she'd never heard of, Zara had nothing left to give. "You'll have to wait for the next coach through," he'd said with indifference as he drove away, leaving them in this desolate outpost halfway between nowhere and salvation. The trading post owner had been equally unsympathetic. "No charity here, madam. You can wait outside till the next coach comes through. 3 days, maybe 4, 3 days." With barely enough food for one meal and only half a canteen of water between them, Zara couldn't stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks as she sat on one of the bags, pulling her children close. Emma, ever the observant one, reached up and brushed a tear from her mother's face. "Don't cry, Mama. Papa always said crying doesn't fix things." But Thomas wasn't here to see how their world had crumbled, wasn't here to help carry this burden. Zara allowed herself a moment of weakness, shoulders shaking with silent sobs as she held her children, shielding them from the reality of their situation with her body, if not her certainty. She didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats over her quiet weeping, didn't notice the tall figure dismounting from a chestnut mare until a shadow fell across her bent form. "Madam, are you all right?" The voice was deep, gentle despite its roughness, like sand-polished wood. Zara looked up, hastily wiping her tears with the back of her hand. The man standing before her embodied the frontier, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a storm-washed sky. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, a gun belt slung low on his hips, and his hat, though dusty, was respectfully held in his hands as he addressed her. "We're fine," she lied, straightening her spine and summoning what dignity she could. "Just waiting for the next stagecoach." The stranger glanced toward the horizon where the coach had disappeared, then back to the small family huddled in the sparse shade of the trading post's awning. His gaze took in the children's exhausted faces, the meager belongings, and finally settled on Zara's reddened eyes. "Next coach won't be through for near a week," he said, his voice softer now. "There was a washout at Coyote Pass. They'll be routing around through Socorro." A week. Zara felt the world tilt beneath her. They wouldn't survive a week out here. "I'm heading to Promise Creek," the stranger continued. "It's about 2 days' ride west of here. Not much of a town yet, but there's clean water, decent folk, and work to be had for those willing." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I've got room in my wagon for you and your little ones if you've a mind to go that direction." Suspicion immediately flared. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. "Why would you do that for strangers?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My ma would haunt me to my dying day if I left a woman and her children stranded in this territory." He extended a calloused hand. "Name's Kieran Blackwood. I run cattle about 15 miles outside Promise Creek." Zara hesitated, trying to assess this man who had appeared like an answer to prayers she hadn't dared to voice. His eyes held steady, patient, as if he understood her wariness and respected it. Emma tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, I like his horse." The simple, childish observation somehow broke the tension. Kieran Blackwood's face softened as he looked at the little girl. "Her name's Penny," he told Emma, "because she's copper-colored just like your hair." Samuel, typically shy around strangers, peeked out from behind Zara's skirts with newfound interest. "You have a real wagon?" he asked, his voice small but curious. Kieran nodded. "Around back. Got supplies from the trading post. I was heading home when I saw you folks." Zara took a deep breath. They had no money, no food, no prospects, and now, apparently, no stagecoach. What choice did she really have? "I can pay you when we reach Promise Creek," she said, though she had no idea how she would make good on that promise. "Once I find work." Kieran shook his head. "No need for payment, madam. The road's lonely, and company would be welcome." He hesitated, then added, "I lost my wife and daughter to fever 5 years back. I know what it is to need a helping hand." Something in his voice, the quiet sincerity, the undercurrent of old pain, convinced Zara more than any assurances could have. She extended her hand to his. "Zara Holloway, and these are my children, Emma and Samuel." His hand engulfed hers, warm and strong. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Holloway." "It's just Miss now," she corrected, the words still strange on her tongue despite the months of widowhood. "My husband passed this spring." Understanding passed across his face. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Holloway." He released her hand and knelt down to eye level with the children. "What do you say we get you two some water and something to eat before we head out? Got some jerky and biscuits in the wagon that need eating." At the mention of food, both children's eyes widened. Samuel's stomach gave an audible growl, and the boy blushed deeply. Kieran laughed, a rich sound that seemed to brighten the dusty air around them. "Sounds like we'd better hurry." He stood and nodded toward their bags. "May I?" Zara nodded, and he easily lifted all 3 carpet bags as if they weighed nothing. As he led them around the trading post to where his wagon waited, Zara felt a curious mixture of relief and trepidation. She was putting her trust and her children's lives in the hands of a stranger. Yet somehow, as she watched him help Emma climb up to pet the nose of his patient mare, she felt the first stirring of hope she'd experienced since Thomas drew his last breath. "Come on, Mama." Emma called, her earlier fatigue momentarily forgotten in the excitement of the horse and the promise of food. Kieran glanced back at Zara, something unreadable in his expression. "Don't you worry, Miss Holloway," he said quietly. "I'll see you all safe to Promise Creek." As she followed him to the wagon, Zara wondered if he could possibly understand the weight of the burden she carried, not just the physical journey ahead, but the crushing responsibility of raising 2 children alone in a world that had proven itself callous and unforgiving. She couldn't have known then that this chance encounter at a dusty trading post would change the course of all their lives, or that the man who had stopped to help a weeping stranger would soon become the foundation upon which she would rebuild her shattered world. Kieran's wagon was modest but well-maintained, loaded with supplies and covered with a canvas top that would provide welcome shade from the relentless sun. He helped Zara up to the wooden seat before lifting each child and settling them in the back among the crates and sacks. "There's a water barrel secured in the corner," he told the children. "Fresh filled this morning. Help yourselves, but mind you don't spill too much. It's precious out here." The grateful look Zara gave him as the children scrambled toward the water made something twist in Kieran's chest. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking to Penny, who obediently began pulling the wagon away from the trading post. "You're traveling light," he observed after they'd put some distance behind them, the silence broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the muted sounds of the children exploring their new surroundings. Zara's hands twisted in her lap. "We sold most of our belongings to pay debts and buy the stagecoach tickets." She hesitated, then added with quiet dignity, I kept what was most important: some clothes, a few books for the children, my sewing kit. I'm quite skilled with a needle. I thought perhaps in California. California's a long way yet, Kieran said gently. Promise Creek might not be what you were hoping for, but it's growing. The railroad's talking about putting in a stop next year. We've got a mercantile, a small school, even a doctor who's only half drunk most days. This earned a small smile from Zara. It sounds like paradise compared to where we've been. And where's that? St. Louis most recently. Before that, Chicago. Thomas, my husband, was always chasing the next opportunity. A shadow crossed her face. He wasn't a bad man, just restless. Always certain the next town would be where our fortunes turned. Kieran nodded, understanding the type. The West was full of men with dreams bigger than their abilities, dragging their families along on journeys of diminishing returns. He'd seen too many widows left behind when those dreams turned to dust. And you, Zara asked, breaking into his thoughts, you mentioned you have a ranch, just a small spread. Started with 20 head of cattle and a run-down cabin. Got about 200 head now, and the cabin doesn't leak when it rains. He gave a self-deprecating smile. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. They fell into an easy conversation as the wagon rolled westward, the harsh landscape gradually giving way to scattered juniper and sage. Kieran pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the territory, while Zara told him about the children, Emma's love of reading, Samuel's fascination with anything that moved on four legs. The afternoon passed more pleasantly than Zara would have thought possible given the circumstances of the morning. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Kieran guided the wagon off the main trail toward a small grove of cottonwoods that indicated water. We'll make camp here tonight, he explained. There's a spring that feeds a small pool, good water and some shelter from the wind. He helped Zara down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment, they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, could smell the leather and sun-warmed cotton of his shirt. Something fluttered in her chest, awareness, perhaps, or simply gratitude for his kindness before she stepped back, suddenly conscious of how long it had been since she'd been touched by a man. Emma, Samuel, she called, turning to help her children from the wagon. Come help set up camp. Kieran efficiently went about the business of making their temporary home, unhitching Penny and seeing her watered, gathering wood for a small fire, unloading bedrolls and cooking supplies. The children followed him about, full of questions and eager to help, their earlier exhaustion forgotten in the adventure of camping under the stars. Zara found herself watching him with the children, his patient answers to Emma's endless questions, the way he showed Samuel how to safely feed twigs to the growing fire. There was a natural ease to his interactions with them that spoke of a man who understood children, who perhaps missed the daughter he'd mentioned. When he produced a rabbit from his supplies and began preparing it for their supper, Samuel watched with wide-eyed fascination. Kieran noticed the boy's interest and motioned him closer. You want to learn how to clean a rabbit properly? He asked. Samuel nodded eagerly. Zara started to object. Surely this was too grisly a task for a 4-year-old, but Kieran caught her eye with a small shake of his head. Boy needs to learn how things work out here, he said quietly. Better with someone showing him proper than figuring it on his own someday. There was wisdom in his words that Zara couldn't deny. Thomas had been a city man through and through, more comfortable with ledgers than lariats. He'd never taught Samuel the practical skills a boy might need in this untamed country. Perhaps this was another gift Kieran was offering, not just safe passage, but knowledge her son would need to survive in the world they now inhabited. She nodded her agreement and busied herself with Emma, showing her how to arrange stones around the fire pit while keeping an eye on Samuel's impromptu lesson. Kieran was careful to be thorough without being graphic, explaining each step with a matter-of-factness that took the sting out of the bloody work. By the time the rabbit was spitted over the fire, Samuel was proudly recounting each step of the process to his sister, who listened with a mixture of disgust and reluctant interest. "You did well," Kieran told the boy, ruffling his hair. "Takes most boys twice as long to learn that skill." Samuel beamed under the praise, standing a little taller as he helped gather plates from the wagon. Their supper was simple but satisfying: roasted rabbit, beans warmed in the can, and biscuits that Kieran had purchased at the trading post. The children ate ravenously, and Zara realized they hadn't had a proper meal since the previous day. As twilight deepened into night, the children's excitement gradually gave way to exhaustion. Emma fell asleep mid-sentence, her head drooping against Zara's shoulder. Samuel fought sleep longer, determined to stay awake with the adults, but eventually succumbed, curled up in a bedroll Kieran had laid out near the fire. With the children asleep, a different kind of silence fell between the adults. Zara stared into the dancing flames, acutely aware of Kieran's presence across the fire, his face half in shadow as he methodically cleaned his hunting knife. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for the ride, but for this." She gestured to the sleeping children, the remains of their meal, the peaceful camp. "I was losing hope back there." Kieran looked up, his expression serious in the firelight. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." Zara shook her head. "No, not anyone." She'd learned that lesson the hard way in the months since Thomas's death, the false friends who disappeared when the money ran out. The landlord who'd given her 3 days to vacate. The minister's wife whose charity came wrapped in condescension. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded, accepting her gratitude without further protest. "You should get some sleep, Miss Holloway. We've got a full day's travel tomorrow." "Zara," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "Please call me Zara." A small smile touched his lips. "Zara," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "That's pretty, unusual. My mother had fanciful tastes," she explained. "She read it in a book once, a princess from some far-off land. It suits you." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood." "Kieran," he corrected gently. "Good night, Kieran." She settled into her bedroll beside the children, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the soft hooting of an owl, the distant yip of coyotes, the occasional snap of the fire as Kieran added another branch. Despite the hard ground beneath her and the uncertainty that still lay ahead, Zara fell asleep more easily than she had in months, comforted by the solid presence of the man keeping watch over them all. Morning came with the first pink streaks of dawn lighting the eastern sky. Zara awoke to find Kieran already up, coffee brewing over a rekindled fire. He nodded a greeting as she sat up, careful not to disturb the still sleeping children. "There's a small pool behind those rocks," he said, nodding toward the spring, "if you want to freshen up." Grateful for the opportunity, Zara gathered her small bag of toiletries and made her way to the secluded spot. The pool was clear and cool, fed by a trickling spring that emerged from between the rocks. She washed her face and hands, combed her tangled hair, and changed her collar for a clean one, feeling somewhat restored by even these simple ablutions. When she returned to camp, the children were awake and helping Kieran prepare a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses. Samuel was earnestly explaining to Kieran about the toy soldiers his father had given him for his last birthday, while Emma was carefully arranging flat stones in a pattern only she understood. "Good morning," Zara greeted them, touched by the domestic tableau. "Mama, Mr. Kieran says we might see real Indians today," Samuel exclaimed, bouncing with excitement. Zara shot Kieran a questioning look, concern evident in her expression. "Apache territory to the north," he explained, "but the bands around here have been peaceful for years. Trade with the settlements sometimes. Nothing to worry about." Still, Zara kept the children closer as they ate breakfast and broke camp, the specter of Indian attacks being one of the many dangers she'd feared when contemplating the journey west. Kieran seemed to sense her unease. "I wouldn't take you and the little ones through dangerous country," he assured her as they loaded the wagon. Been traveling these trails for 8 years without trouble. His confidence was reassuring, and by the time they were back on the trail, the children's excitement had pushed aside Zara's worries. The day was clear and relatively cool for late summer, with a gentle breeze taking the edge off the sun's heat. Around midday, they stopped in the shade of a large rock formation to rest the horse and eat a light meal of jerky and dried apples. Samuel had just taken a big bite of jerky when he froze, eyes widening as he pointed toward the distance. "Look," he managed through his mouthful. Zara turned to see 3 riders approaching from the north, their silhouettes distinctive against the sky. Kieran rose calmly, placing himself slightly in front of Zara and the children. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Nothing to worry about, but let me do the talking." As the riders drew closer, Zara could see they were indeed Apache warriors, their dark hair worn long, bodies lean and tough from a life in the harsh desert. They rode without saddles, controlling their painted ponies with just rope halters. Each carried a rifle, but the weapons remained slung across their backs, not in their hands. Kieran raised a hand in greeting as they approached. "Dagati," he called out, using what Zara assumed was an Apache greeting. The lead rider, a man with a face as weathered as the surrounding rocks, reined his pony to a stop several yards away. He returned the greeting with a nod, then spoke in heavily accented English. "Blackwood. Long time." "Red Hawk," Kieran acknowledged. "Good to see you well." The Apache's dark eyes moved to Zara and the children, his expression unreadable. "New wife, children?" he asked bluntly. Kieran shook his head. "Friends, taking them to Promise Creek." Red Hawk considered this, then gestured to the northwest. "Bad men, 3 sons ago. Take horses from Blue Water Creek Ranch, kill 2 cowboys." Zara felt a chill despite the warm day. Kieran's posture stiffened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Rustlers or raiders, white men, 6, maybe 7, go west." Red Hawk made a circling motion with his hand. "We go around." "You should too," Kieran nodded. "Appreciate the warning, we'll keep our eyes open." The Apache warrior reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew something, then extended his hand toward the children. "For little ones." Samuel shrank back against Zara, but Emma, after a questioning glance at Kieran, who gave a slight nod, stepped forward and accepted the gift, 2 small carved wooden animals, a horse and what appeared to be a bear. "Thank you," she said clearly, showing none of the fear that Zara was struggling to hide. Red Hawk's stern face softened almost imperceptibly. He said something in his native tongue to his companions, then looked back to Kieran. "Safe journey." With that, the 3 warriors wheeled their ponies and rode away, quickly disappearing into the landscape as if they'd never been there at all. Samuel exhaled dramatically. "Real Indians," he exclaimed, both terrified and thrilled. Kieran chuckled, the tension leaving his shoulders. "Apache. Good trackers and hunters. Red Hawk's band trades with some of the ranches around here. They're not fond of the army, but they've kept the peace better than most." "He seemed to know you," Zara observed, still watching the place where the riders had vanished. "Helped him a few years back when some cowboys were giving his people trouble," Kieran explained, beginning to pack up their small meal. "He's got a long memory for both friends and enemies." "What about the bad men he mentioned?" Zara asked, lowering her voice so the children wouldn't hear. Kieran's expression turned serious. "Probably the Carson gang. They've been hitting isolated ranches all through the territory. We'll steer clear of their usual routes." They resumed their journey, Kieran setting a slightly faster pace than before. The encounter with the Apache seemed to have reminded him of the potential dangers of the trail, and he kept a more vigilant watch on the surrounding landscape as they traveled. To distract the children and herself from worrying, Zara encouraged them to sing songs. Soon the wagon rang with off-key renditions of "Oh Susanna" and "Sweet Betsy" from Pike, with Kieran occasionally joining in with a surprisingly pleasant baritone. By late afternoon, they reached a portion of the trail that wound through a narrow canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side. Kieran grew more alert, his right hand never straying far from the revolver at his hip. Are we nearly to Promise Creek? Zara asked, hoping to break the tense silence that had fallen. Another day's journey, Kieran replied, his eyes scanning the ridgelines above them. We'll camp at Willow Springs tonight. It's just beyond this canyon. They were nearly through the canyon when Penny suddenly tossed her head and whinnied, her ears pricking forward in alarm. Kieran immediately pulled the wagon to a halt, his hand moving to his gun. Get down, he said quietly but firmly. Take the children and get behind those rocks. Zara didn't question him. She gathered Emma and Samuel and hurried them to a cluster of boulders beside the trail, her heart pounding in her chest. What is it? She whispered once they were concealed. Not sure, Kieran murmured, drawing his revolver. Penny smells something she doesn't like. Could be nothing. Could be the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the canyon, sending birds scattering from the cliffs above. A bullet splintered the wooden seat where Zara had been sitting moments before. Get down, Kieran shouted, diving from the wagon and rolling to take cover beside them. Keep your heads down, Emma began to cry, and Samuel buried his face against Zara's skirts. She pulled them close, trying to shield them with her body as another shot rang out, this one kicking up dust near the wagon. Carson's men? She asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm for the children. Kieran nodded grimly. Probably spotted us from the ridge. Thought we'd be easy pickings. He checked his revolver, then pulled a second gun from his boot. I count 2 shooters, maybe more waiting. What do we do? Zara clutched the children tighter, terror making it hard to breathe. When I start shooting, you take the kids and run for that crevice in the canyon wall, Kieran instructed, pointing to a narrow opening about 20 yards away. It leads to a small box canyon. You'll be sheltered there. What about you? His eyes met hers, steady and determined. I'll keep them busy, then join you. Before she could protest, Kieran rose slightly and fired 3 rapid shots toward the ridge where the ambushers were positioned. Shouts and curses confirmed he'd at least startled them, if not hit anyone. Now. He hissed, continuing to fire as Zara grabbed her children's hands and ran for the crevice, half dragging Samuel, who stumbled in his panic. The sound of gunfire followed them, Kieran's revolver, and the higher crack of rifles from the ridge. Just as they reached the crevice, a bullet struck the rock face inches from Zara's head, showering her with stone fragments. She pushed the children through the narrow opening, following immediately after. The box canyon beyond was small but offered shelter, with high walls on 3 sides and only the narrow entrance through which they'd come. Zara pressed the children against the far wall, trying to quiet Emma's terrified sobbing. It's all right, she whispered, though she felt anything but certain. Mr. Kieran will be here soon. The gunfire outside had intensified. Zara counted at least 3 different weapons, Kieran's revolver and what sounded like 2 rifles. Then came a sound that chilled her blood, a man's cry of pain. Kieran, she gasped, instinctively starting toward the entrance. Mama, no, Emma clutched at her skirt. Don't leave us. Torn between the children and the man who had risked his life for them, Zara hesitated at the narrow opening, peering cautiously out. What she saw made her blood run cold. Kieran was pinned down behind the wagon, blood staining his left sleeve. 2 men were working their way down the ridge, using the rocks for cover as they moved closer. A 3rd man lay motionless on the trail. Apparently Kieran had managed to hit at least one of their attackers. Without conscious thought, Zara reached for the small derringer she kept hidden in her boot, a gift from Thomas in their early days in St. Louis, when they'd lived in a neighborhood where a woman alone wasn't safe after dark. She'd never fired it at anything but paper targets, but she understood its deadly purpose. Stay here, she told the children firmly. Do not move until I come back for you. Emma's eyes widened. Mama, please, I have to help Mr. Kieran, Zara said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. He saved us, and now I'm going to help save him, but I need you to be brave and watch over your brother. Can you do that? The little girl nodded solemnly, pulling Samuel closer to her side. That's my brave girl. Zara kissed them both quickly, then slipped through the crevice, the tiny gun clutched in her shaking hand. Outside, the gunfire had momentarily ceased. Zara could hear men's voices calling to each other, planning their next move, she realized. Keeping low, she worked her way along the canyon wall toward the wagon, using the scattered boulders for cover. She was nearly to the wagon when one of the outlaws spotted her. "Hey, there's a woman," he shouted, raising his rifle. Before he could fire, Kieran lunged up from behind the wagon and shot, the bullet striking the man in the shoulder and spinning him around. The second outlaw turned toward the commotion, giving Zara the opening she needed. She raised the derringer and fired, the small gun bucking in her hand. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to startle the outlaw, making his own shot go astray. Kieran didn't waste the opportunity. He fired twice more, and the second outlaw fell, clutching his leg and cursing. The first man was struggling to his feet, his rifle forgotten as he clutched his bleeding shoulder. "Run," he shouted to his companion. "It ain't worth dying for." The wounded outlaws staggered away, scrambling up a game trail that led out of the canyon, leaving their dead comrade behind. Zara ran to Kieran, who had slumped back against the wagon wheel, his face pale beneath his tan. "You're hurt," she said, examining the bloody tear in his sleeve. "Just a graze," he insisted, though his grimace as she touched his arm suggested otherwise. "The children? Safe." "Hidden in the box canyon." She tore a strip from her petticoat and bound his wound as best she could. "We need to get out of here before they come back with more men." Kieran nodded, accepting her help to stand. "Get the children. I'll check the wagon and Penny." By some miracle, neither the horse nor the wagon had been seriously damaged in the attack. One wheel had a splintered spoke, and their water barrel had been hit, losing about half its contents, but they could still travel. When Zara returned with Emma and Samuel, both wide-eyed and shaken but unharmed, Kieran had already hitched Penny back to the wagon. "We need to move fast," he told them, lifting the children into the wagon bed. "Those two will probably head back to their camp to tend their wounds, but they might have friends nearby." Zara climbed up beside him on the seat, noticing how he winced as he took the reins in his injured arm. "Let me drive," she offered. He looked surprised. "You know how." "My father was a livery stable owner in Illinois before he died," she explained. "I drove wagons before I could properly write my name." A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he handed over the reins. "Full of surprises, aren't you, Zara Holloway?" They set a grueling pace for the remainder of the day, not stopping until they were well clear of the canyon, and the sun was sinking low on the horizon. Willow Springs turned out to be a small oasis, a natural spring surrounded by a grove of willows and cottonwoods that seemed like paradise after the barren landscape they'd traveled through. As Zara helped the exhausted children down from the wagon, she noticed Kieran swaying slightly on his feet, his face unnaturally pale in the fading light. "You need to rest," she said firmly, taking his uninjured arm to steady him. "That wound needs proper tending." For once, he didn't argue. He allowed her to guide him to a grassy spot beneath a cottonwood, while she set the children to gathering firewood under strict instructions to stay within sight. When she unwrapped his makeshift bandage, Zara was alarmed to see that what he dismissed as just a graze was actually a deep furrow across his upper arm, still seeping blood. She cleaned it as best she could with water from the spring and a clean cloth from her bag. "It needs stitching," she said after examining the wound closely. Kieran nodded tiredly. "Got a needle and thread in my saddlebag, done it before." "I'll do it," Zara said firmly. When he looked about to protest, she added, "I told you I'm skilled with a needle." Flesh isn't so different from fabric. In truth, she'd never stitched a bullet wound before, but she had helped the doctor tend to Thomas during his illness and had watched him suture a deep cut on their neighbor's arm once. The principle seemed straightforward enough. While the children set up camp under Kieran's murmured instructions, Zara threaded a needle from his kit and sterilized it in the flame of the newly built fire. She gave him a stick to bite down on and a small measure of whiskey from his flask. "This will hurt," she warned, poising the needle above the wound. He met her eyes steadily. "I trust you." Those three simple words stirred something deep within her gratitude, yes, but something more complex that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Instead, she focused on the task at hand, carefully stitching the edges of the wound together with small, even sutures. To his credit, Kieran barely flinched, though sweat beaded on his forehead and his jaw clenched tight around the stick. When she finished, she wrapped the wound with clean strips of cloth and helped him drink some water. "You did well," he said softly, his eyes holding hers. "Would have made a fine doctor." "Wasn't an option for a girl from a small town," she replied with a small smile, "but thank you." As she tended to his wound, Emma and Samuel had fallen asleep in their bedrolls, exhausted by the day's terrors and exertions. Zara and Kieran sat by the fire, speaking in low voices so as not to wake them. "You saved our lives back there," Zara said after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. "And not for the first time since we met." Kieran shook his head slightly. "Seems to me you did some saving yourself. That was brave, coming out with that little pea-shooter." "Foolish, maybe," she admitted, "but I couldn't let them. I couldn't lose you." The admission surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. He studied her face in the flickering firelight. "Why did you trust me, Zara? Back at the trading post, you didn't know me from Adam." She considered the question, wanting to give an honest answer. "I looked in your eyes," she said finally. "My father always said you can tell a man's character by his eyes, whether he meets yours squarely or shifts away, whether there's cruelty there or kindness." She paused. "Your eyes were kind." "Sad maybe, but kind." "Sad." He seemed genuinely curious. "You said you lost your wife and daughter. That kind of loss leaves marks." She hesitated, then added softly, "I recognize it because I see the same thing in my own mirror every morning." Their eyes held across the fire, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them, two people who had known grief, who carried its weight daily but refused to be crushed by it. The moment was broken when Penny whinnied softly from where she was picketed nearby. Kieran reluctantly looked away, scanning their surroundings out of habit. "We should both get some rest," he said. "It's been a long day, and tomorrow will be no easier." Zara nodded and moved to her bedroll beside the children, but sleep was long in coming. She kept replaying the events of the day, the terror of the ambush, the sight of Kieran bleeding, the strange intimacy of tending his wound. Most of all, she thought about the connection she'd felt as they talked by the fire, a connection that both comforted and unsettled her. She had not expected to feel such things again after Thomas. Had believed, in fact, that part of her had died with him. Yet here, in this wilderness with a man she'd known barely 2 days, something was stirring back to life within her, something she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge, let alone embrace. Morning brought clearer heads and renewed purpose. Kieran's arm was painful but showed no signs of infection, and he insisted he was well enough to travel. They broke camp efficiently, working together with the ease of a much longer acquaintance. "We should reach Promise Creek by nightfall," Kieran told them as they set out, the rising sun painting the landscape in shades of gold and rose. "It's smaller than what you might be used to, but it's a good place. Good people mostly." "It sounds wonderful," Zara said sincerely. After the events of the previous day, any settlement with walls and other people sounded like paradise. The trail widened as they traveled, eventually joining a more established road that showed signs of regular use: wagon ruts, hoof prints, the occasional discarded item. By mid-afternoon, they began to see evidence of human habitation: a distant ranch house, fenced fields, cattle grazing on the hillsides. "Blackwood land begins here," Kieran said as they crossed a small stream, pointing to a weathered wooden sign that marked the boundary. "Ranch house is about 5 miles east, but the trail to town continues west." Zara found herself studying the landscape with new interest, trying to imagine Kieran's life here, tending cattle, building fences, making a home in this harsh but beautiful country. It was so different from the city life she'd known with Thomas, Yet there was something appealing about its simplicity and honesty. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the first buildings of Promise Creek came into view, a cluster of structures nestled in a shallow valley where several waterways converged. It wasn't much compared to St. Louis or even the smaller towns Zara had known back east, but after days on the trail, it looked like civilization indeed. "There's the Mercantile," Kieran pointed out as they drove down the town's single main street. "The building with the blue door is our doctor's place, Dr. Matthews. Church is at the far end, doubles as the schoolhouse most days. Miss Peterson teaches about 15 children of various ages." Zara noted that several people called greetings to Kieran as they passed, many eyeing her and the children with undisguised curiosity. News would spread quickly in a town this size, she realized. By morning, everyone would know about the widow and her children who had arrived with Kieran Blackwood. "Where will we stay?" she asked, suddenly uncertain now that they had reached their destination. She had no money for lodging and no idea how quickly she might find work. "Mrs. Wilkins runs a boarding house," Kieran said, gesturing to a 2-story building with a small front porch. "She's a good woman, fair with her rates. I thought we'd get you settled there tonight." "I can't pay," Zara admitted, hating the words even as she spoke them. "Not yet, anyway." Kieran gave her a sidelong glance. "I've got credit in this town, and Mrs. Wilkins owes me a favor or two besides." Before Zara could protest this further evidence of his generosity, they had pulled up in front of the boarding house. A plump, gray-haired woman emerged onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Kieran Blackwood," she called. "Wasn't expecting to see you in town this week." "And with company, I see." Kieran helped Zara down from the wagon, then lifted the children, who stared wide-eyed at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Mrs. Wilkins, this is Miss Zara Holloway and her children, Emma and Samuel. They've had a long journey and could use a good meal and a soft bed. Mrs. Wilkins's shrewd eyes took in their travel-worn appearance, Kieran's bandaged arm and the clear exhaustion on all their faces. "Well, come in," she said, her voice softening. "Supper's nearly ready and I've got 2 rooms vacant upstairs." As they followed her inside, Zara felt a curious mixture of relief and regret. They had reached safety, which had been the goal for so long that she'd scarcely allowed herself to think beyond it. Yet now that they were here, she realized their journey with Kieran was effectively over. He would return to his ranch and they would. Begin again somehow in this tiny frontier town where they knew no one but him. The boarding house was clean and simply furnished, with a large common room dominated by a long dining table. Delicious smells wafted from the kitchen at the back of the house, making Samuel's stomach growl audibly. Mrs. Wilkins laughed and patted his head. "Sounds like someone's ready for supper. Why don't you children come help me set the table while your mama and Mr. Blackwood get settled?" She led the suddenly shy but curious children toward the kitchen, giving Zara and Kieran a moment alone. "I don't know how to thank you," Zara began, turning to face him in the quiet front room. "What you've done for us." "No need for thanks," he said, echoing his words from their first night on the trail, but this time with a warmth that hadn't been there before. "There is every need," she insisted. "You saved us, Kieran, not just from the outlaws, but from—" She gestured vaguely, trying to encompass the desperation and hopelessness she'd felt at the trading post. "From everything. I don't know what would have happened to us if you hadn't come along." He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple gesture sent warmth coursing through her. "I'm glad I did come along," he said quietly. "It's been a long time since I had anyone to care about what happened to them." The admission hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to voice. Zara found herself wanting to lean into his touch, to close the small distance between them, but footsteps in the hallway broke the moment. Mrs. Wilkins returned, now accompanied by a tall, thin man in a slightly rumpled suit. "Here's our town doctor now," she announced. "I sent Jimmy to fetch him when I saw that arm of yours, Kieran." Dr. Matthews shook hands with Zara before turning his attention to Kieran's injury. "Let's have a look at that wound, shall we?" he said, gesturing toward a chair by the window. While the doctor examined Kieran's arm, murmuring approval at Zara's stitchwork, Mrs. Wilkins drew Zara aside. "Your children are delightful," she said warmly. "They're helping my cook, Mrs. Chen, roll out biscuits. Now, Kieran mentioned you might be looking for work." Zara nodded, grateful for the change of subject. "Yes, I'm skilled with a needle dressmaking, alterations, fine embroidery, and I can read and write well enough to keep books if there's need." Mrs. Wilkins's face brightened. "Well now, that is fortunate. Our town has been without a proper seamstress since Mrs. Elliott moved to Tucson last spring, and with the Harvest Festival coming up next month, there'll be plenty of ladies wanting new dresses." She patted Zara's hand. "You stay here tonight, get your bearings, and tomorrow I'll introduce you around town. I've got a small room off the back porch that would do nicely for a sewing room if you're interested." Relief washed over Zara. "That would be wonderful, thank you." "No need for thanks, Mrs. Wilkins said, unconsciously echoing Kieran's words. "It's how we survive out here, helping each other when it's needed." Supper that night was the best meal Zara and the children had enjoyed in months: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and blackberry cobbler for dessert. The boarding house's other residents included the town's schoolteacher, a young mining engineer, and an elderly couple who had come west to live with their son, the local blacksmith. All were welcoming and curious, but not intrusively so. After the meal, with the children settled in their room upstairs, Zara found herself on the front porch with Kieran. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, the air cool but not cold. "Will you return to your ranch tomorrow?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. He nodded. "Need to check on things. My foreman's capable, but—" He trailed off, then added, "I'll be back in town in a few days. Bring some supplies for the Harvest Festival." "I'm glad," Zara said simply, surprising herself with her honesty. "The children will want to see you." "Just the children?" His voice was teasing, but with an undercurrent of genuine question. She turned to face him, finding the courage to speak the truth. "No, not just the children." Something shifted in his expression, hope, perhaps, or the release of a long-held caution. "Zara," he began, then seemed to struggle for words. "I know it's too soon. You've been through so much and you need time to find your footing here. I don't want to rush you or make you feel obligated in any way." "I don't feel obligated," she assured him. "Grateful, yes, but what I feel goes beyond gratitude." She hesitated, then added softly, "I thought that part of me died with Thomas. I never expected to feel interested in someone again." "Interested?" There was a smile in his voice now. She felt her cheeks warm. "You know what I mean." "I do," he acknowledged, his expression growing serious again. "And I feel the same. After losing Rebecca and little Sarah, I figured that was it for me. Threw myself into building the ranch, didn't let myself think about what was missing." He looked out at the star-filled sky. "But these past few days with you and the children, it's like waking up after a long sleep." His words resonated deeply with Zara. She, too, had been sleepwalking through life since Thomas's death, focused only on survival, on getting through each day for the children's sake. The emotions Kieran stirred in her were both frightening and exhilarating, a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of feeling more than grief and worry. "So what now?" she asked. He seemed to consider the question carefully. "Now you get settled, find your place here. And I'll come to town when I can. We'll take it slow, see where it leads." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "No pressure, no expectations, just possibility." "Possibility," she repeated, liking the sound of the word. "I think I can manage that." They stayed on the porch a while longer, talking quietly about practical matters, where the school was, which days the post rider came through town, who at the mercantile might be willing to stock her sewing work. It was ordinary conversation, but underlaid with a current of connection that made even these mundane topics feel intimate and important. When they finally said goodnight, Kieran brushed his lips against her knuckles in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply affecting. "Sleep well, Zara Holloway," he said softly. "Welcome to Promise Creek." As she watched him walk to where he'd arranged to stable his horse and wagon for the night, Zara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't the destination she'd planned when she'd set out from St. Louis, but perhaps it was where she was meant to be all along. The weeks that followed saw Zara and her children settle into life in Promise Creek with surprising ease. Mrs. Wilkins was true to her word about the sewing room, and word quickly spread about the new seamstress's skill with a needle. Orders for alterations came first, then commissions for new dresses as the harvest festival approached. Emma started school with Miss Peterson and thrived in the small classroom, her natural intelligence and love of reading quickly making her a favorite with the teacher. Samuel, still too young for formal schooling, spent his days helping Mrs. Chen in the kitchen or following Mr. Harris, the boarding house handyman, as he made repairs around the property. Kieran was true to his word as well. He came to town every few days, sometimes on business, sometimes with the transparent excuse of needing supplies he could easily have sent his ranch hands for. Each visit included time spent with Zara, and the children helping Samuel build a small wooden horse, listening to Emma read from her school primer, sharing quiet conversations with Zara on the boarding house porch after the children were asleep. Their relationship developed slowly but steadily, built on mutual respect and growing affection. Kieran never pressed for more than Zara was ready to give, seeming content with the gentle progression from friendship to something deeper. 3 weeks after their arrival in Promise Creek, Kieran invited them to visit his ranch. "Thought the children might like to see the horses," he explained, "and I've got a new calf that Samuel might enjoy helping to feed." The invitation was accepted with enthusiasm, especially by Samuel, who had developed a fascination with all things related to ranching. On a clear Saturday morning, Kieran arrived with his wagon to collect them, his face lighting up when he saw Zara in a new blue dress she'd made herself. "You look beautiful," he said simply, helping her up to the seat beside him. The children rode in the back, pointing excitedly at landmarks along the way and pestering Kieran with questions about ranch life that he answered with endless patience. Blackwood Ranch proved to be larger and more established than Zara had imagined from Kieran's modest descriptions. The main house was a substantial log structure with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. A large barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings completed the central compound, with corrals and fenced pastures extending beyond. "It's wonderful," Zara said sincerely as they pulled up in front of the house. "You've built all this yourself." "Had help," Kieran admitted, a touch of pride in his voice despite his modesty. "Good men working for me, but yes, it's grown from pretty humble beginnings." A middle-aged man with a weather-beaten face emerged from the barn as they arrived. "Boss, didn't expect you back so early." His curious gaze moved to Zara and the children. "Frank, this is Miss Holloway and her children, Emma and Samuel," Kieran introduced them. "This is Frank Dugan, my foreman and the man who keeps this place running when I'm not here." Frank tipped his hat to Zara. "Madam, young uns. Welcome to Blackwood Ranch." His eyes held a knowing twinkle as he glanced between her and Kieran, but he kept any observations to himself. "Just broke that new colt this morning, boss. Thought you'd want to know." "Thanks, Frank. We'll come see him after I show our guests around." The tour of the ranch delighted the children. Samuel was entranced by the horses and cattle, while Emma showed unexpected interest in the kitchen garden where a Chinese man named Lai was growing an impressive array of vegetables. "Lai's been with me almost from the start," Kieran explained as they watched Emma help the gardener pick ripe tomatoes. "Best cook in the territory and can grow anything in this desert soil." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and surprisingly homey touches curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the back of a sofa, bookshelves filled with volumes that suggested Kieran was more well-read than his cowboy exterior might indicate. "My wife's things," he explained when he caught Zara examining a delicate china figurine on the mantelpiece. "Couldn't bear to pack them away after. Well, after seemed like erasing her somehow." "I understand," Zara said softly. "I kept Thomas's pocket watch, even though it hasn't worked in years. Some things are too precious to let go of, even when the person is gone." He nodded, grateful for her understanding. "I've kept too much, probably. The house needs a woman's touch again. Frank's sister comes to clean once a week, but it's not the same as having someone live here, care for the place." There was something in his tone that made Zara wonder if he was thinking beyond the present moment, imagining a different future for the house and for himself. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. After the tour, they enjoyed a lunch prepared by live fried chicken, fresh bread, and vegetables from the garden. The children ate ravenously, especially Samuel, who declared it was even better than Mrs. Chen's chicken, but don't tell her I said so. After lunch, Kieran took them to see the new calf he'd mentioned. Samuel was allowed to help bottle feed the wobbly-legged creature, an experience that left him wide-eyed with wonder. "Can I be a rancher when I grow up, Mr. Kieran?" he asked earnestly. Kieran ruffled the boy's hair. "Reckon you'd make a fine one, Samuel. Takes a steady hand and a kind heart, and you seem to have both." The simple praise made Samuel stand taller, his chest puffing out with pride. Zara watched the interaction with a lump in her throat, acutely aware of what her son had missed in losing his father at such a young age: the male guidance, the affirming words, the example of what a man should be. As the afternoon waned, Kieran suggested a short ride to a nearby creek where a small waterfall created a perfect swimming hole. "It's still warm enough for a paddle if you're of a mind," he told the children, who immediately clamored for the opportunity. The creek was a hidden gem, a ribbon of clear water cutting through the arid landscape, shaded by cottonwoods and willows. The waterfall was modest, but created a deep, clear pool perfect for cooling off on hot days. While the children splashed in the shallows under Kieran's watchful eye, Zara sat on a sun-warmed rock, letting the peaceful setting wash over her. She hadn't felt this content, this at ease, in longer than she could remember. "Penny for your thoughts," Kieran said, coming to sit beside her after making sure the children were safely occupied building a small dam of stones across a shallow portion of the creek. "I was thinking how beautiful it is here," she replied honestly. "How peaceful." "It is that," he agreed. "Found this spot my first week on the land. Used to come here to think, to figure out if I was brave enough or foolish enough to try making a go of ranching on my own. Which was it? Bravery or foolishness?" He laughed. "Both, I reckon. Most worthwhile things in life are a mix of the two." Zara's gaze drifted to her children, their faces alight with joy as they played in the water. Like taking two small children halfway across the country on nothing but a cousin's letter and a prayer. "That took courage," Kieran said firmly. "Don't sell yourself short, Zara. What you've done for those children, the sacrifices you've made, it's remarkable." His praise warmed her more than the autumn sun. "I didn't feel brave. Most of the time I was terrified, still am sometimes." "That's part of being a parent, I think," Kieran said thoughtfully. "The constant fear that you'll make a mistake, that you won't be enough." A shadow crossed his face. "After Rebecca and Sarah died, I blamed myself for not getting the doctor sooner, for not recognizing how serious the fever was until it was too late." Zara reached out impulsively and took his hand. "It wasn't your fault. In my head, I know that. In my heart." He shrugged. "Some guilts are harder to let go of than others." They sat in companionable silence for a while, hands still joined, watching the children play. When it was time to head back to the ranch, both Emma and Samuel protested, begging to stay longer. "We'll come back," Kieran promised them. "Maybe next time we can bring fishing poles. There are some nice trout in the deeper parts of the creek." This prospect cheered them considerably, and they chattered excitedly about fishing all the way back to the ranch house, where Lai had prepared a simple but delicious supper. As twilight approached, Kieran hitched up the wagon for the return journey to town. The children, tired from their day of adventure, fell asleep almost immediately once they were settled in the back, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill. "They had a wonderful day," Zara said as they drove through the gathering darkness. "We all did. Thank you for inviting us." "It was my pleasure," Kieran replied sincerely. "The house hasn't heard children's laughter in a long time. It was good." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clop of Penny's hooves. The night was clear, stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. "Zara," Kieran said finally, his voice soft in the darkness. "I know it hasn't been long since you came to Promise Creek, and I meant what I said about giving you time, not rushing things." She felt her heart quicken. But I find myself thinking about you all the time, about you and the children, about what it might be like to." He hesitated, then continued, "to have you in my life permanently." Though she had sensed the direction of his thoughts, the actual words still sent a thrill through her. "Kieran, you don't need to answer now," he hurried to add. "I'm not formally asking yet, just thinking out loud, I suppose, letting you know where my heart is heading." Zara was silent for a long moment, sorting through her own complicated feelings. When she spoke, it was with careful honesty. "When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. Being a wife, being loved that way, I focused all my energy on the children, on survival." She turned to look at his profile in the starlight. "I never expected to meet someone like you. Is that good or bad?" There was a smile in his voice, though his eyes remained on the road ahead. "Good," she assured him. "Unexpected, but good. I feel alive again when I'm with you. The children adore you. It's just too soon," he suggested when she trailed off. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just afraid of trusting again, of building a life that could be taken away." She took a deep breath. "Thomas wasn't always reliable. He had dreams, big ones, but he wasn't always practical about how to achieve them. We moved too often, chased too many schemes that came to nothing. By the end, we had nothing left but debts." Kieran considered this. "You're afraid I might be the same?" "No," she said immediately. "You're nothing like Thomas in that way. You've built something real, something lasting. I think I'm more afraid that I'm not enough, that I'll disappoint you somehow, or that you'll wake up one day and realize that taking on a widow with 2 children wasn't what you really wanted." He reined Penny to a stop, turning to face Zara fully in the moonlight. "That won't happen," he said with quiet certainty. "I know what I want, Zara. I've had 5 years to think about what matters to me, what I'm looking for. It's not just a wife, not just a mother for a family I might have someday. It's a partner, someone strong and kind and brave." His hand found hers in the darkness. "Someone like you." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, not of sadness but of a strange, overwhelming hope. "I think," she said carefully, "that I could love you very easily, Kieran Blackwood. I think perhaps I already do a little." The admission hung between them, delicate and profound. Kieran's hand tightened on hers. "May I kiss you, Zara Holloway?" Instead of answering, she leaned toward him, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers gently at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. It was a kiss of promise, of possibility, of a future neither had dared to imagine until now. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I'll wait," he promised. "However long you need, but know that when you're ready, I'll be here." "I don't think I'll need very long," Zara whispered, surprising herself with the admission. "The children and I, we've been wandering for so long. It feels like we've finally found where we're meant to be." They completed the journey to town in a comfortable silence charged with new understanding. When they reached the boarding house, Kieran carried the sleeping children inside while Zara led the way, their movements together already taking on the easy coordination of a family. After settling the children in their beds, they stood together on the boarding house porch, reluctant to say goodnight despite the lateness of the hour. "When will we see you again?" Zara asked. "I need to ride to Tucson for some business," Kieran replied. "Be gone about a week." "But when I return?" He hesitated, then added with a smile, Perhaps you and the children might consider spending Thanksgiving at the ranch. It's only a few weeks away and Lai always cooks too much food for just me and the hands." "We'd like that very much," Zara said, warming to the idea of a proper holiday celebration. It would be their first without Thomas, but perhaps that was fitting a new tradition for their new life. He kissed her once more, a brief but tender touch, before reluctantly taking his leave. Zara watched him go, a curious lightness in her heart despite the weight of emotions the day had stirred. Inside, she checked on the children one last time before preparing for bed. Emma stirred as Zara tucked the blanket more securely around her shoulders. "Mama," she murmured sleepily, "is Mr. Kieran going to be our new papa?" The innocent question caught Zara off guard. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because he looks at you the way Papa used to, and because he makes you smile again." The little girl's perception was startling in its clarity. "I would like it if he was our new papa." "Samuel would too." Zara smoothed her daughter's copper curls. "We'll see, Emma, it's still early days, but I'm glad you like him." "I love him," Emma said with the simple certainty of childhood before drifting back to sleep. The words echoed in Zara's mind as she prepared for bed. Love. Such a small word for such an enormous concept. Was she ready to love again? To open herself to the vulnerability that love demanded? As she drifted toward sleep, Zara realized that the question was already answered. Her heart had made its choice almost from the moment Kieran had approached her at the trading post and offered to carry her burdens alongside her. The rest was just a matter of time and courage and faith in the possibility of second chances. The days while Kieran was in Tucson passed both quickly and slowly for Zara. She was busy with sewing commissions for the upcoming Harvest Festival, but her thoughts often strayed to the tall rancher and the future that might be unfolding before them. News traveled fast in a small town like Promise Creek. Though Kieran had been discreet in his attentions, the frequent visits and the day trip to the ranch had not gone unnoticed. Mrs. Wilkins was the first to broach the subject directly, cornering Zara in the sewing room one afternoon. "Kieran Blackwood's a good man," she said without preamble, settling her ample frame in the chair opposite Zara's sewing table. "Best in the territory if you ask me. Been alone too long since he lost his family." Zara continued her careful stitching on a dress bodice. "He has mentioned his wife and daughter. It was a terrible loss. Nearly destroyed him," Mrs. Wilkins nodded. "Threw himself into that ranch, worked himself half to death for 2 years straight. We all worried about him." She fixed Zara with a direct look. "He's different since he brought you and those children to town. There's life in his eyes again." Not knowing quite how to respond, Zara simply nodded, focusing on her stitches. "I'm not one to meddle," Mrs. Wilkins continued, ignoring Zara's skeptical glance. "But life's too short and good men are too rare to waste time dithering. If there's happiness to be had, you should grab it with both hands." "It's not that simple," Zara protested mildly. "The children love him already," Mrs. Wilkins interrupted. "Anyone with eyes can see that. Especially that boy of yours. Follows Kieran around like a shadow whenever he's in town, soaking up every word like gospel." It was true, Zara had to admit. Samuel had blossomed in Kieran's company, eagerly absorbing the rancher's patient lessons about horses and cattle and the natural world around them. And Emma, usually more reserved with strangers, had taken to Kieran with unexpected enthusiasm. "I just don't want to make a mistake," Zara admitted. "For their sake as much as mine," Mrs. Wilkins's expression softened. "That's what makes you a good mother, dear, but sometimes the bigger mistake is letting fear keep you from happiness." With that parting wisdom, she heaved herself up from the chair and left Zara to her sewing and her thoughts. Similar conversations occurred throughout the week, subtle, and not so subtle hints from townspeople who had taken a liking to Zara and her children, and who clearly approved of Kieran's interest in the young widow. By the time Kieran returned from Tucson, it seemed the entire town was watching their courtship with benevolent interest. His return coincided with the Harvest Festival, a community celebration held in the town square. Stalls selling food and crafts lined the perimeter, while tables laden with dishes contributed by local families occupied the center. A small group of musicians played lively tunes, and children ran about playing games under the watchful eyes of parents and neighbors. Zara had worked late into the night finishing dresses for several townswomen, including a new frock for Emma made from scraps of blue calico that matched the color of her eyes. Samuel wore his best shirt, freshly washed and ironed, and Zara herself had made a new dress of soft green muslin that complemented her auburn hair. They were helping Mrs. Wilkins arrange her contribution of pies on one of the communal tables when a murmur went through the crowd. Zara looked up to see Kieran entering the square, and her heart gave a familiar leap at the sight of him. He'd clearly made an effort for the occasion, his usual trail clothes replaced by clean dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest she hadn't seen before. His hair was freshly trimmed, and he'd shaved his usual stubble to a neat mustache. "Mr. Kieran," Samuel spotted him first, breaking away from the table to run full tilt toward the rancher. Kieran caught the boy up in a hug, swinging him around once before setting him back on his feet. "Samuel, you've grown a foot since I saw you last," he teased, though he'd been gone barely a week. Emma was only slightly more restrained in her greeting, walking quickly to join them but breaking into a run for the last few steps. Kieran knelt to receive her hug, saying something that made the little girl laugh and twirl to show off her new dress. The sight of the three of them, together Kieran kneeling between the children, all three with matching smiles, struck Zara with such force that she had to grip the table for support. They looked like a family. They felt like a family. Kieran looked up and saw her watching them. The smile he gave her was warm enough to melt the last of her reservations. He said something to the children, who nodded and ran back toward the food tables, leaving him free to approach Zara. "You look beautiful," he said simply when he reached her, taking her hands in his. "So do you," she replied, then laughed. "Handsome, I mean, the vest is new," he nodded. "Bought it in Tucson. Thought I should make an effort for my first harvest festival with." He hesitated, then finished, "with someone special to impress." "Consider me impressed," she said softly. They might have stood there longer, hands joined and eyes locked, if Mrs. Wilkins hadn't cleared her throat loudly beside them. "Plenty of time for mooning over each other later," she said with good-natured impatience. "Right now, there's a festival to enjoy and food getting cold." The day passed in a blur of simple pleasures, shared meals, games with the children, introductions to townspeople Zara hadn't yet met. Kieran stayed close by her side throughout, his hand finding the small of her back as they walked, his smile never far from his face. As dusk approached, lanterns were lit around the square, casting a warm glow over the continuing festivities. The musicians struck up a waltz, and couples began to take to the open space in the center of the square that served as a dance floor. "May I have this dance?" Kieran asked formally, extending his hand to Zara. She hesitated. "It's been a long time since I danced." "Me too," he admitted. "We can be rusty together." With a smile, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her to the dance floor. His arm circled her waist, strong and secure, as they began to move to the music. After a few awkward moments, they found their rhythm, turning smoothly among the other couples. "I missed you," Kieran said quietly as they danced. "A week away felt like a month." "We missed you too," Zara replied. "The children asked about you every day." "Just the children?" There was that teasing note in his voice again, the one that made her heart flutter. "No," she admitted. "Not just the children." He pulled her a fraction closer, still proper enough for a public dance but intimate enough to make her very aware of his nearness. "I did a lot of thinking while I was in Tucson about what I want, what I'm ready for." "And what conclusions did you reach?" Zara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "That life's too short to waste time being cautious when you know something is right." His blue eyes held hers intently. "That sometimes you have to take a leap of faith." The music ended, but they remained on the dance floor, still in each other's arms, oblivious to the knowing smiles of those around them. "Kieran," Zara began, but he shook his head slightly. Not here, he said. Come for a walk with me. The children will be fine with Mrs. Wilkins for a few minutes. After confirming that Emma and Samuel were happily engaged in a game with other children under Mrs. Wilkins's watchful eye, Zara allowed Kieran to lead her away from the square toward the quieter end of the main street. They stopped by the small church, its white painted walls glowing softly in the moonlight. I had a whole speech planned, Kieran said, turning to face her. Practiced it all the way back from Tucson, but now that I'm standing here with you, I can't remember a word of it. Zara smiled, oddly touched by his nervousness. You don't need a speech with me, Kieran. He took her hands in his expression suddenly serious. When Rebecca and Sarah died, I thought that was the end of any chance I had at happiness. Figured I'd live out my days alone on that ranch with nothing but cattle and hired hands for company. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Then I saw you at that trading post, holding those children, looking so brave despite the tears on your face, and something in me just woke up. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as she listened, scarcely daring to breathe. I know it hasn't been long, Kieran continued. And maybe this is too soon, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He took a deep breath, then slowly went down on one knee before her, still holding her hands. Zara Holloway, I love you. I love your children as if they were my own. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Though she had sensed the direction of the conversation, the actual proposal still took her breath away. For a moment, she could only stare at him, overwhelmed by the emotions flooding through her. You don't have to answer right now, Kieran said quickly, misinterpreting her silence. If you need time, yes, Zara interrupted, finding her voice at last. Yes, Kieran, I will marry you. The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He rose to his feet and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, his hands framed her face with exquisite gentleness. Are you sure? He asked, giving her one last chance to reconsider. It is quick, and I know you've been through so much. Zara placed her fingers against his lips to stop his words. I've never been more sure of anything, she said, echoing his own declaration. You came into our lives when we had nothing left but each other and our tears. You offered to carry our burdens with us. How could I not love you for that? This time when he kissed her, it was without restraint, a seal on the promises they had just exchanged. Zara responded with equal fervor, all her doubts and fears melting away in the certainty of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and a little dazed, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. We should tell the children, he said. The thought of Emma and Samuel's reactions brought a fresh wave of emotion. They'll be so happy, Zara said, wiping away a joyful tear. Especially Samuel, he adores you. And I adore him, Kieran assured her. Both of them. I promise you, Zara, I'll be the best father I can be to them. They'll never doubt they're loved and wanted. Hand in hand, they walked back to the festival, where the children were still playing with their new friends. When they saw Kieran and Zara approaching, they ran to meet them, full of excited chatter about the games they'd been playing. Kieran knelt down to their level, his face serious but his eyes warm. Emma, Samuel, I have something important to ask you, he said. I've asked your mama to marry me to become my wife, and that would make you my children if you'd like that. What do you think? Would it be all right with you if I became part of your family? Samuel's eyes grew wide. You'd be our papa, for real, Kieran confirmed, if you'll have me. Yes, Samuel threw himself at Kieran with such force that the man nearly toppled backward. Yes, yes, yes. Emma was more thoughtful, looking from Kieran to her mother and back again. Would we live at your ranch? She asked practically. Kieran nodded. Yes, we would. There's plenty of room for everyone, and you could still come to school in town. I'd drive you in the wagon myself each morning. And Mama would be there too. She wouldn't have to work so hard anymore. The perceptiveness of the question touched both adults deeply. That's right, Kieran assured her. Your mama would be the lady of the house. She could still sew if she wanted to, but she wouldn't have to work for other people anymore. Emma considered this carefully, then nodded her approval. Then I think it's a very good idea. When will the wedding be? Kieran looked to Zara, realizing they hadn't discussed this detail. That's for your mama to decide, he said diplomatically. Soon, Zara said firmly. Before winter sets in, I think. There's no reason to wait. They returned to the festival as an engaged couple, and word spread quickly through the gathering. Congratulations poured in from all sides, along with offers of help with wedding preparations. By the time they left the festival that night, plans were already being made for a ceremony at the church in 3 weeks' time. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Zara created her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk that Kieran had brought back from Tucson as a surprise. Emma would have a new dress too, as she was to be a flower girl, and Samuel would stand proudly at Kieran's side as a miniature best man. At Kieran's ranch, preparations of a different sort were underway. The master bedroom was repainted and new curtains hung. A second bedroom was prepared for the children, though Kieran mentioned that in the spring, he thought they might add on to the house to give each child their own room as they grew older. The house was built for a family, he told Zara during one of her visits to help with the preparations. It's been waiting for you all this time. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect late autumn day with just enough chill in the air to put roses in the cheeks, but not enough to make the celebration uncomfortable. The small church was decorated with late-blooming wildflowers and evergreen boughs, and it seemed as if the entire population of Promise Creek had turned out for the occasion. Zara prepared at the boarding house with Mrs. Wilkins and several other women helping her dress and arranging her hair. Emma was beside herself with excitement, twirling in her new blue dress and practicing how she would scatter flower petals down the aisle. "You look beautiful, Mama," she said solemnly when Zara was finally ready, the ivory gown complementing her auburn hair, which had been arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. "Thank you, sweetheart," Zara replied, kneeling carefully to give her daughter a hug. "Are you happy about today? About Mr. Kieran becoming your new papa?" Emma nodded, her small face serious. "I think Papa would be happy too. He always said he wanted us to be taken care of if anything happened to him." The simple wisdom of her child's words brought tears to Zara's eyes. "I think you're right," she said softly. "Your papa would want us to be happy." At the church, Samuel was already with Kieran, the boy nearly bursting with pride in his new suit as he stood beside the tall rancher. When the music began and the doors opened to reveal Zara and Emma, a hush fell over the gathered congregation. Kieran's face as he watched his bride walk toward him was a study in pure joy. All his love, all his hopes for their future together were written plainly for everyone to see. Zara felt her own heart swell in response, any last lingering doubts vanishing in the certainty of his devotion. The ceremony itself was simple and moving. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran's kiss was gentle but full of promise, eliciting cheers and a few good-natured whistles from the congregation. The celebration afterward was held in the town square, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by what seemed like every household in Promise Creek. There was dancing and laughter, speeches and toasts, and through it all, Kieran never strayed far from Zara's side, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. As the afternoon waned, they prepared to leave for the ranch, their home now, all four of them together. The children had gone ahead with Frank and Lai to get settled in, leaving the newlyweds to say their goodbyes to the townspeople who had become such an important part of their lives in such a short time. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Blackwood?" Kieran asked as he helped Zara into the wagon, the new name sending a thrill through her. "I've been ready since the day I met you," she replied, surprising herself with the truth of the words. "I just didn't know it yet." The ride to the ranch was filled with comfortable conversation and shared dreams for their future. As they approached the main house, Zara was surprised to see it aglow with lanterns and decorated with ribbons and flowers. The men wanted to do something special, Kieran explained, a touch of embarrassment in his voice. Hope you don't mind. It's wonderful, Zara assured him, touched by the gesture from the ranch hands. Inside, they found a cozy scene awaiting them. Lai had prepared a special dinner, and the children were already in their nightclothes, tired from the excitement of the day but determined to welcome their mother and new father home. After sharing a quiet meal together, their first as a family, Kieran carried the half-asleep children to their new bedroom. Zara followed, helping to tuck them in and kissing each on the forehead. "Good night, my loves," she whispered. "Sleep well in your new home." "Night, Mama." "Night, Papa," Samuel murmured, the new title for Kieran coming naturally to his lips. Kieran's expression as he heard the word was one Zara knew she would remember all her days, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and profound love that spoke more eloquently than any words could have. When they retired to their own room, Kieran took Zara's hands in his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about what you said at the festival about me offering to carry your burdens with you." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "It's not a burden, Zara. You and the children, you're a gift I never expected to receive. Every day with you is a blessing I won't take for granted." Tears filled Zara's eyes at his words. "I feel the same," she whispered. "When I think of where we were just a few months ago, how desperate things seemed. And now to be here with you with this new life ahead of us." She shook her head, overwhelmed by the distance they had traveled, both literally and figuratively. Kieran drew her into his arms, his embrace both protective and reverent. "I love you, Zara Blackwood," he said, her new name a caress on his lips. "And I love you," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, sealing their vows in the privacy of their home, surrounded by the new life they had built together from the ashes of their separate sorrows. In the years that followed, Promise Creek prospered and grew, as did the Blackwood family. The railroad came through as predicted, bringing new settlers and opportunities. Kieran's ranch expanded, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Zara continued her sewing, not out of necessity, but for the joy of creation, her designs sought after throughout the region. Emma and Samuel thrived under Kieran's loving guidance, growing into confident, capable young people who moved easily between the worlds of town and ranch. They were joined 2 years after the wedding by a baby sister, Rebecca Sarah Blackwood, named for the family they had lost but never forgotten. 2 years after that, a brother, Thomas Kieran, completed their family circle, honoring both the past and the present in his name. On warm summer evenings, the family often gathered on the wide porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. On one such evening, as they celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary, Zara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Kieran asked, coming to sit beside her while the children played in the yard with the latest addition to the family, a shaggy puppy named Scout. "I was remembering the day we met," Zara replied, leaning against his shoulder. "How hopeless everything seemed, and how you changed that with a simple offer of help." Kieran's arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "Best decision I ever made, stopping at that trading post that day." "Mine too," Zara agreed, "trusting you, accepting your help." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children's laughter as they played in the golden evening light, Emma now 11, and growing more beautiful by the day. Samuel 9 and the spitting image of Kieran in his mannerisms, despite no blood relation. Rebecca with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, and little Thomas toddling after his siblings on chubby legs. "We've been blessed," Kieran said softly, his gaze taking in their home, their land, their family. "Yes," Zara agreed, turning to press a kiss to his cheek. "More than I ever dreamed possible." From despair to joy, from tears to laughter, From strangers to beloved family, their journey had been neither straight nor easy, but it had brought them exactly where they were meant to be. Together, under the vast Arizona sky, carrying each other's burdens and sharing each other's joys, they had found not just survival but true happiness. And in the end, that was all that really mattered.